Ever wonder if there's like a map for the human experience? A kind of psychological GPS that charts all the twists and turns our lives take? Well, for the better part of a century, some of the most brilliant minds in psychology have tried to draw exactly that. So today we're going to explore their map of your life.
You know that feeling, right? That sense that what you're dealing with, whether it's at work, in your relationships, or just inside your own head, isn't just some random event. It really feels like you're passing through a specific and sometimes pretty tough chapter of your life. And the amazing thing is, psychology says you're probably right.
And what's really wild is just how common these stages can be. I mean, just look at this number, 80%. That seems incredibly high, doesn't it? What on earth could affect 80% of people in a major psychological study?
The answer? The midlife crisis. Yeah. A huge landmark study out of Yale, led by the psychologist Daniel Levinson, found that a staggering 80% of the men they studied went through this really intense period of transition. So this wasn't some fringe theory, it was a predictable, almost universal part of life's journey.
And that brings us to our first major stop on this roadmap, the idea of life's predictable crises. Levinson's research basically asked a radical question. What if life's biggest hurdles aren't unique to you, but are actually universal milestones that we all go through?
What Levinson discovered was, frankly, startling. He called these stages passages, and they showed up across the board. Didn't matter if you were a blue-collar worker or a white-collar executive. He even identified an age 30 crisis, that moment when guys suddenly feel this immense pressure, like it's almost too late to change their life's path. And then, of course, the big one, the common and often very real midlife crisis. It's like our lives follow a kind of rhythm, a pattern of calm and then crisis.
Okay, but to really understand these adult crises, we have to rewind. I mean, way, way back. We have to look at how it all starts by digging into the work of the architects of developmental psychology, people like Piaget, Freud, and Erikson, and how they thought we build the person we ultimately become. And this is just a fantastic illustration of how different their perspectives were. For the very first stage of life, Piaget was all about the cognitive, how a baby learns about the world through touching and moving. He called it the sensory motor stage. Freud, though, he focused on the psychosexual, with his oral stage, all about gratification. And then you have Erikson, who looked at the social challenge, learning trust versus mistrust. It's all about whether you feel safe in the world. Three brilliant minds, three totally different lenses on the very same starting point.
So how do we actually learn and grow through all these stages? Well, Piaget had this really cool concept called equilibration. You can think of it like a mental balancing act. We take in new information. That's called assimilation. But when that new info doesn't fit with what we already know, we have to adjust our thinking to make room for it. That's accommodation. The process of balancing those two is equilibration, and it's basically the engine that drives our learning.
Now, that all sounds great when it's working perfectly, but what about when it's not? What happens when we get stuck? Is it actually possible for our emotional growth to just stop?
According to Sigmund Freud, the answer to that is a big, flashing yes. He had a specific term for this, fixation. And the idea is that if you go through way too much stress or anxiety during one of these developmental stages, your emotional growth can literally get frozen in time. You become psychologically stuck in that phase of your life.
So how might this actually show up later in life? Well, from a Freudian point of view, an adult who has issues with, say, alcoholism or smoking could be seen as having an oral character. In other words, they're seen as being fixated in that very first mouth-focused stage of development. It's a pretty powerful idea, right, that our struggles today could just be echoes from our distant past.
Okay, so beyond just our basic growth, what about our conscience, that little voice inside that tells us right from wrong? Well, you guessed it, psychologists have charted a course for how our moral compass develops too.
And here again, we see different maps for the same territory. For Freud, morality came from what he called the superego. You can think of it as that internalized voice of your parents and society, constantly whispering all the shoulds and musts in your ear. But Lawrence Kohlberg saw it differently. He believed our ability to reason about morality actually evolves through a series of predictable stages as we get older.
This quote just perfectly captures the essence of Kohlberg's very first stage of moral development. It's so simple, so direct. For a little kid, morality isn't some deep philosophical debate. It's a really basic calculation.
Exactly. At this early level, wrong simply means, what am I going to get punished for? There are no higher principles involved. It is all about avoiding getting in trouble. The entire moral universe is defined by that fear.
So as we grow up and move into the long stretch of adulthood, the big questions in life start to change. It becomes less about building our foundation and more about what we're going to build on top of it. What is it that actually drives us forward?
Erikson had a really powerful term for what he saw as the main job of middle adulthood, which he put at roughly 35 to 60 years old. He called it generativity, and it's this fundamental human drive to create or nurture things that are going to outlive you. It's all about leaving a legacy.
So what does that actually look like? Well, it can mean raising the next generation, sure, but it can also mean doing productive, creative work that you're proud of, or contributing to society in a meaningful way. The main thing is that it's focused outward. The opposite of generativity isn't failure, it's stagnation, or self-absorption, basically turning inward instead of building something for the future.
Now, you can't talk about what drives us without bringing up another essential map of the human psyche. And this one comes from the psychologist Abraham Maslow. He kind of pushed back on the idea that we're only driven by these dark, unconscious urges. Instead, he came up with a much more optimistic model of human motivation.
And this is it, his famous hierarchy of needs. The idea is so brilliant because it's so simple. We have to satisfy our most basic lower-level needs before we can even think about moving up the ladder. First, you need food, water, safety. Once that's covered, then you can focus on love and belonging. Then comes esteem, that feeling of accomplishment. And only then can you reach for the very top of the pyramid, self-actualization, which is really just a fancy way of saying becoming everything you're capable of being.
Which brings us to the final chapter in this roadmap. After all the stages, all the crises, the building, the striving, how do we look back and make sense of it all? How do we even measure a life? Erikson had a name for the successful outcome of this final stage. He called it ego integrity. And it's that feeling you get when you can look back on your whole life, the triumphs, the failures, all of it, and feel a sense of wholeness and satisfaction. It's the feeling that it all made sense, that it was your life, and you accept it completely.
And what's at the absolute heart of that feeling of integrity? It's this right here. The core belief that your life actually served a purpose, that it wasn't just a series of random events, but that it all added up to something meaningful.
And really, that's the ultimate question these psychological roadmaps leave us with. After exploring all the stages and all the theories, the journey turns right back to you. When you look at the map of your own life, both the past and the future, what is it that will ultimately give it a sense of purpose?